So for my project, I wanted to talk about Milton and his very complicated relationships with women. It's pretty clear that in his writing and in Paradise Lost that he doesn't always look that favorably upon women, which is understandable when you look at his life and his many wives. And well, first there was his wife, Mary Powell, who he married in 1642. And that marriage did not last long. She left him. And after that, he tried to pursue a different woman named Miss Davis. And he tried to convince her that since his wife had left him and they were technically divorced, that she should marry him, but she was not having any of that. Which was what prompted him to write the Doctrine and Discipline of Divorce. And he says some very not kind things about women and marriage in it. There's a couple of parts in particular. For instance, there's one area where he talks about how women should know things, how they should be educated, which on the surface makes him sound almost like he's a feminist, because that seems like a very feminist notion, and women should get educated. But when you dig deeper, you see that that's not really what he's saying, because what he actually says is that they should be educated in what their husbands are interested in, and that the whole point of them having knowledge is so they can hold a conversation with their husband. Because he's saying, well, you don't need education unless the man wants you to know something, and then it's your responsibility to learn it, which is kind of awful. So, it's sort of like if a woman were to say, hey, I really want to learn about this, and then the husband was like, what? I'm not interested in that. You need to learn about what I like. So it's not nearly as progressive as it would seem at first glance. And in another part of the doctrine, he talks about how husbands should be able to leave their wives for any perceived uncleanness, which, specifically talking about Paradise Lost, we all know that it starts off with Satan basically pitching a fit because he's mad at God, because God won the battle and he's down in hell whining and complaining and saying that, well, I lost, but whatever, I'm gonna keep being bad. And eventually we move to the Garden of Eden, where things start to get really misogynistic with poor Eve, who just gets blamed for everything. So we start off with Adam, because God really wants some children to love him unconditionally. And God decides that Adam's going to be alone all by himself, so he takes a rib and makes Eve. Which already biblically creates this sort of hierarchy, whereas Adam was first. Adam was the main one that was supposed to be creative, and Eve was just sort of an accessory to Adam, which is already not boding well for, women and feminism. So then Milton goes on this weird spiel about Eve's hair and how it's really wild, and I guess it's supposed to sound sexy, and it's supposed to represent her wild untameness, and it's compared to a vine, which, as we discussed in class, was supposed to represent how it's feeble and flimsy and needs support, which is a metaphor for how Eve is completely useless without Adam to support her, which, again, really, really anti-feminist to imply that, women, because Eve is the original woman, she's the mother of all women, to imply that she's incapable of doing anything without the support of a man. So then we move on to the Tree of Knowledge, which God sticks in the Garden of Eden and then tells Adam and Eve, absolutely don't touch this. And then, of course, it's Eve who has the dream where she is betraying God and committing a sin. And what's really weird about this part of the book that I had a problem with was that in the dream, Eve is deliberately sinning, but when she wakes up, Adam reassures her that it's okay, that she didn't really sin, she just thought about it, so that's fine. But then later, when she gets tricked into sinning, even though she doesn't want to, all of a sudden, all hell breaks loose, and she's accused of, ruining absolutely everything, even though it really wasn't her intention to take the apple, and it was just Satan tricking her. But I'll get more into that in my paper. So Adam and Eve are relaxing in their house, and wouldn't you know it, here comes Raphael with his just tons and tons of wings all over his body. And Adam immediately gets upset at Eve because she's not preparing food for someone who does not eat, and he gets upset with her because, as we all know, in Milton's time, a good housewife would always have snacks ready for company. So he tells her to go into the pantry, which they have in the Garden of Eden, even though they don't have perishable food yet. So as soon as she leaves, Adam and Raphael start discussing stuff without her, which again is pretty indicative of what Milton thinks about women, where it's like, once, these silly little women are out of the way, then the big grown men can talk. And it makes this implication that Eve is not as important as Adam because she doesn't get to be part of this discussion. So, of course, later, Eve is just, standing around not eating from the tree of knowledge. And here comes a serpent. And he starts talking to Eve. And Eve, instead of freaking out like any normal person would at having an animal talk to them, just sort of talks with it. And wouldn't you know it, but the snake turns out to be Satan in disguise, trying to trick Eve into eating from the tree of knowledge. Which initially she resists because God told her not to, but then Satan's like, no, you should do it. And she's like, okay, because she's a woman and she's weak and she can't do anything without the guidance of Adam. So she eats from the apple, and immediately she has all these horrific ideas about being above or even equal to Adam, which, again, is really not a good representation of feminism when the idea of a woman wanting to be equal to a man is seen as this really grave sin. And poor Eve, just for a second, just revels in the idea of having something that Adam doesn't, and immediately wimps out because she cannot stand the idea of not having Adam with her. So she decides she's going to share the apple with him. And here's another part that really upsets me, is that Adam eats from the apple, but Eve still gets all the blame, even though God told both of them not to do it. Adam somehow gets a pass in a way because he claims that he's only doing it for Eve because he doesn't want her to be alone in her sin. But they both ate from it, and they do both get punished by being cast out of Eden, but Eve clearly gets most of the blame here. Adam could have said no. After this, Eve just immediately, just her whole personality changes, and she becomes like a temptress. And she and Adam just start having sex because women can either only be totally pure or totally whores, which is very Petrarchan. And that whole Petrarchan theme continues with Satan just being struck dumb by Eve's beauty. He just totally stops in all his evil plots to just admire her, which is just very hilariously Petrarchan. And this idea that Eve is so useless and pathetic and weak, but oh, her beauty is so great that she can render even the king of hell speechless. And it's a really good reflection on what Milton thought about women at the time. and she just messes everything up. And it's really it really sets up this idea that women are naturally inferior to men because of Eve, because she was just so inferior to Adam, and she was so useless that obviously, you know, all women now therefore need the support and guidance of men. So I really want to focus on that on my paper, and I hope you guys enjoy my video. Okay, thank you.